Today on Rocket Pop Reviews, we have a scintillating conversation, but one that's kind of intellectual, on the value of using stories to form your family and how using something like a movie can actually animate the spirit, can get your children and your family into a place of spiritual thinking, and the value, we're going to be hearing specifically from Jeremy Pryor today on the value of using story to create what he calls a story-formed family. Jeremy Pryor is an author. He runs a website about families. You're going to really appreciate this conversation coming right up.
Rocket Pop is go.
Welcome to Rocket Pop Reviews, giving Christian families a reliable source for reviews of movies, shows, books, and podcasts.
Every 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
We're serious about the fun of entertainment.
Nice to be in orbit.
Roger, 0J, and I feel fine.
And now your hosts, Steve Manuel and Jeff Davenport.
Hey, welcome to Rocket Pop. This week we got a special guest. We've got our friend Jeremy Pryor. Now, Jeremy has written a book called Family Revision. He has a website called Family Teams. There's another name to your websites, Jeremy?
No, that's good. FamilyTeams.com.
Okay, Family Teams. And Jeremy's whole deal is building families in a way that honors God, that follows the biblical narrative. And he has talked to me about shows that he recommends. I remember specifically that Little Dorrit came into my life because of you, Jeremy.
Really?
So we're gonna be talking to you about how to use entertainment and movies and shows and whatnot to build up one's family. Sound good to you?
Yeah, I'm in. That's great.
I am super excited you're here because I am looking forward to your perspective on this stuff. Anyone who's listened to or watched Rocket Pop for a while knows that we're all about looking at entertainment through a Christian worldview lens. So my first question is this. When you think about that Christian worldview lens and you think about Christian families, what do you think is the most important thing a Christian family needs to keep in mind when they're thinking about the films or the entertainment that they're going to digest as a family? What's the top line thing that they need to have in mind?
Yeah, I would say that to understand that character is formed mostly through stories. And I think that's a lot of Christians have a hyper left brain assumption about character formation. It's just like, if we just pound you with rules and laws and ideas and theory, then you're going to suddenly desire in your heart to do the right thing. And that's not how character is formed. Character is primarily formed because there's something that we see in a story that causes us to desire to do the right thing. This is why Jesus spent so much of his time telling parables. This is the reason why almost 80% of the Bible is stories. If most Christians today were to have written the Bible, it'd sound more like the Quran, which is mostly a list of rules. And that's not what Christianity is, because God's incredibly wise and he made us kind of story-formed creatures. And so I would say that this is a necessity as Christian parents. You need to understand how to introduce your kids to powerful stories if you want to see their character formed.
So story matters is kind of what you're saying. And we can't just look at it as, well, it's just light entertainment. It's actually having some sort of, they say that we're all being discipled by something.
Yes.
And this is one way that the culture might be discipling us, is through these stories.
And when we talk about movies, I think the way that I think about movies is they're all in a continuum of storytelling. And so when you have a book that's a particular author who might spend 2 or 3 years of his or her life writing this book, they might have a couple of editors, and then it gets published. Okay, so that's how a lot of stories are generated, and there's a lot of hyper creative people. But a movie is fascinating because what it is, oftentimes it takes what an author has done or what a screenwriter has done, and then you just pour, in some cases, $100 million, the top 1,000 most creative people. You create an entire organization to tell a single story, and so the creation of something like that is a form of art that is unlike anything the world has ever seen. And so I think we need to honor the process of movie making. It is an incredible art It's so important. And our kids, their minds are blown because you take a story formed creature and then you put them in a room and then show them a movie, this sort of form of storytelling or art that's been created by this immense team of creative people, and it's going to have an impact on them and it's going to be profound. And so we want to be really close to this genre, to this art form, and understand how to wield it properly for our families.
By the way, I love this idea that if you watch the credits to a movie at the end,
Yes.
there's usually there's like a little company that was set up that's named the same as the movie, because that's, I'm sure, for accounting purposes, but that's exactly what we're saying. They have set up a temporary company to put this thing on a screen. That requires a tremendous amount of work. It's,
Yes.
the old cliche is, it's amazing that any movie gets made at
Yes.
all.
Yeah. So
Now,
much work.
Clearly, you're a reader. You have books back there. I don't assume it's just.
Yes.
So you're a reader. Would you contrast for us, best of your ability, how does a story-formed person, I like that phrase, a story-formed person, God made us as story-formed people. How does a story-formed person interact or have an impression on them via book as opposed to a visual medium like a movie or a television show?
Yeah. So the power of the written fiction story is that it forces you to generate the images in your own mind. And so that's actually a process that is really important for kids to develop. And so this, I think, is the one major downside of the movie, is that it causes you to have the director's imagination in your eye, and it's so overwhelming that it's difficult for you to even create a alternate imagined element of this author's story. So, but when you're reading, you get to experience the story in your own mind's eye, and you want your kids to develop a really vivid imagination and the ability to see these stories in their minds. And so, I don't think you can downplay the importance of developing that kind of internal imagery. This is why also moving your kids from picture books into just word books is really important. That process is when they start to really see the story play out in their mind's eye. And for some people, some kids, that comes very naturally. For other kids, it doesn't. One of the main reasons that we're discovering now that that's important is that there's a scholar who I absolutely love. His name is Ian McGilchrist, and he is the top scholar in the world on hemispheric difference, left and right brain hemispheric difference, and what is going on in our brains. And he says that we've generated a hyper left brain culture, and this is the kind of culture that is obsessed with just getting a very, very specific nuance to things and thinking that that's the whole thing. And it's creating just a lot of the polarization that we see in the world. There's an inability to deal with mystery. There's an obsession with absolute sharp clarity, that in areas where we really can't have sharp clarity. And so Ian McGilchrist's point is that we have to become more right-brained. His book on this is called the Master and His Emissary. I love that framing, because basically he's saying the left brain is the emissary, the master is the right brain. You want your kids to primarily be right-brained in their orientation. In other words, they are constantly thinking about the big picture. They're thinking about first principles. They understand and it can deal with relationships, complexity. And these things often happen because stories and the imagination that's generated when you're reading a book really lights up that right side of the brain and causes it to become more and more mature. But when you put a kid in front of or an adult, and I deal with a lot of men whose livelihood is in engineering, mathematics, they're sitting in front of spreadsheets. They're constantly being reinforced for being hyper left-brained, and that they lose contact with their ability to imagine. Their prayer life suffers. Their ability to understand the Holy Spirit suffers. Their ability to interpret story and symbol just evaporates. Their ability to dream and even remember dreams. I mean, these are all things that are consequences of really the atrophy of the right brain, which I think deeply affects your ability to lead your kids, to help them be immersed in a world of beauty. And so there's so much to that, but that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to introduce your kids to book stories as well as to movies.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the jobs of a good parent is to curate this lively inner life.
Yes.
That there's almost this unseen bacteria of sort of the creative and spiritual world that we want to be again curating, so that they we were talking about the usefulness of showing a kid Star Wars, and at least there's a parallel that's presented to there is a force out there
Yes.
that you can't see, but is more important than the world that you can touch. Well, that's a helpful parallel actually
It
to
is.
talk to a kid about. So it sounds like you're just saying, like, if all your kid deals with like a German certainty of everything, there's a problem in developing them spiritually. Do
Yes.
I'm sorry to get too tactile here, or too practical, but do you have recommendations for the age at which you need to be reading, just chapter books to your kids? What age do you recommend, like, until what age a kid can't see a screen, and then when can a kid start watching movies? Do you have any thoughts like that?
Yeah, well, you definitely want to introduce kids to text-based literature as soon as their attention span can handle it. And that would then answer your second question, which is help them avoid screens that will make their attention span shrink and their ability to use their imagination shrink. And
Ding.
so that it's an open question, but that's the real danger. Jonathan Haidt just said this recently. He said we all talk about the dangers of screens, and how they're breaking things down, the dangers of social media, the danger of content on screens. He said all of that, you can take every part of that and look at the impact that's having in society, and none of that is nearly as powerful or as important as what screens are doing to our attention. Human attention is being destroyed by screens. And so, and this is, again, I'm a big fan of movies. I think there is a place for screen-based entertainment. But man, putting a young child as a babysitter in front of a screen, what you're doing is you're rewiring and destroying their ability to live inside of their own imagination, their own world. And you're forcing them to like live in a world in which they're hyper left-brained, and now they're interacting with somebody else's vision of reality, and they're not able to generate that on their own. And I think it's very simple to cultivate this as a family, which is you read stories to your children. And man, if you've got older kids who can really handle chapter books, and you're reading a book like Wind in the Willows, which is an incredibly powerful book, I think, in terms of images that are created when you're reading that book. I just recently was reading it to my adult kids a couple weeks ago. I'm just like, you guys, let's like live inside of this image. Look what he created here. It's so beautiful. But if you're doing that, believe me, that 3, 4, 5-year-old who has a very short attention span, they're going to watch their siblings like really get into this chapter book, and they're going to, at a very even younger age, probably pick up the desire to sit around and listen and to begin to imagine. And then, wow, now you're off and running. So I would do this as early as possible.
One of the things I've started noticing is kids will watch 3 hours of YouTube, but they can't watch a 3-hour movie. And it dawned on me that with YouTube, there is this continually, I'll opt back in. I'm making the selection to opt back in. Whereas with a 3-hour movie, the discipline isn't there anymore. And not that our goal is that we raise adults who can watch
TikTok's
3-hour
even
movies.
worse.
That's not the point. But they could sit there. That discipline is gone. It's, what have you done for me? What have you done for me? What have you done for me? That keeps
Instant
me going
dopamine.
down the YouTube trail, as opposed to sitting and going, I might hit a slow point here, but I'm willing to stick it out.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And every one of the other platforms are even, I think YouTube's the best of all the bad platforms in terms of attention destruction. But TikTok, Instagram, even X, its video platform is starting to suck you in a very TikTokish way. Yeah. So what we're trying, and what we discovered really, what these engineers have discovered, is that if you reward people with dopamine, every 3 to 5 seconds, then they're going to sort of be stuck, in sort of a loop, and they're going to have a hard time even taking their eyes away from it. And I know a lot of adults, myself included, who can get sucked into this stuff. And I'm 50 years old. What's going to happen to a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old? How in the world are they supposed to defend themselves against billions of dollars being poured into manipulating their hormones in a very particular way in order to make money for those machines? Like we have to, as parents, stand between our children and this destruction of their attention, and also their destruction of many other elements of their life, including their imagination. So we want to be creating that way of doing that. And so how can we get the best things that we can from modern technology without exposing our kids to some of its worst excesses?
Okay, so over here, Stephen often says the devil's in the ditches. If the ditch over here is, boy, we just kind of let their attention span rot. Well, the ditch over here could be, and I think there's some families who are like, look, I'm too scared of movies for my family. There's dangers here. Can you speak a little bit, and maybe we've touched on this some, but can you speak a little bit to what could a family be missing out on if they're like, look, full stop, we're not doing any of that kind of thing. We're not doing movies.
Yes. Well, the chance that that's going to last is I would say this is a problem across parenting, is that anything that you plan to do, anything you think your children are going to be exposed to in their 20s, 30s, 40s, naturally, then you owe it to your children to expose them to those things in the home in a way that you can, when you still have access to be able to parent its elements and kind of shepherd how they experience it, so that they develop really good habits before you launch them, into the mercy of multi-trillion-dollar tech industries. So yeah, I that's kind of one reason, but the other reason, kind of that's the negative reason, but the positive reason I would say is and this is why I'm a huge fan of podcasts like this, and we need to be talking about this stuff very overtly, because there are opportunities that are incredibly important that we need to consider taking advantage of. Like, why not expose your children to the best, most beautiful stories of the gospel that have ever been told after the gospels themselves? I think we have access to those now. Like, we have such incredible books and movies and beautiful stories, and I have seen the effect of what happens to a child who might have not really understood the meaning of the crucifixion until they were like 12, 13, really apprehended at 6 years old because their dad read to them The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like, that is tremendous, like, to give your kids an opportunity like that to see the gospel in full flourish. And like you guys were talking about Star Wars, I mean, it's really difficult to explain. I know for me, what it was like as like a 5 or 6 year old when the first Star Wars movie first came out. It created spiritual buckets inside of my intuition, inside of my heart, that did not exist before, that were quickly filled with gospel and biblical content. But man, the story did, like Stephen said, really help me understand and have those buckets to fill and see why they're amazing. Like, one of the things that I learned from the first Star Wars movie, and I've never really gotten over it, was the moment when Obi-Wan Kenobi is in a lightsaber, the lamest lightsaber battle on the planet with Darth Vader. And he says to Darth Vader, "Strike me down, and I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." And it was that moment I understood the power of the resurrection, because I was like, oh my gosh, what would it be like if an entire community of people were walking around and they were so unafraid of death, because the only thing death could do would be to spread their message even more, and that the absolute most critical part of themselves, their soul, their spirit, was indestructible. Like, what would happen if such a community existed in the earth? And like, I saw all of that just by listening to that crazy line from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, there's so many elements like that within these scripts that can unveil for people the power of these gospel motifs that are actually really difficult to understand. So I'm a huge fan of them, but I do think it's important to interact with your kids around them, like, because oftentimes they are picking up these symbols in powerful ways, but if you don't process them, oftentimes they are seen only as entertainment and not as like enrichment. And I think that oftentimes the transition from entertainment to enrichment is just the mediation of a father or a mother or a family to say, hey, let's really understand, like, what's the meaning of this? What does this mean? What is the eternal truth? And even like paying attention, like, did you get the chills when you watched that scene in that movie? What is happening there? Isn't that weird that we are the kinds of creatures who can be deeply moved by just sitting and staring at a story, and then all of a sudden something happens and you have a physiological response? Like, that is an incredible thing to pay attention to and to really dial in on and say, oh, let's really understand, because that's not something I'm teaching you. That came from within you, like something inside of you that like suddenly was moved by some story on a screen. Wow. Like, again, this is how you make a right-brained person. This is how you ensure that your kids can understand complex symbols in the Bible, and that can live their life in a way that's much more rich, and that involves all of the beauty and the mystery of life, and not just, this is, to me, when I notice people become hyper skeptical, they become atheists, they lose their faith. I do think that I generally see a hyper left brain pathway that drove them into atheism. I saw it over and over and over again with people when I've watched their journey. That's the pathway that they went down. And we were talking earlier about J.R.R. Tolkien, and all the Tolkien books I have back here. I recently was listening to Ross Douthat. He quoted this line that I think is amazing. He said, "There's two kinds of conservatives in the world: those who read Atlas Shrugged and those who read Lord of the Rings first." And I thank God that I read Lord of the Rings at such a young age, and I was introduced to it, and it really shaped my thinking, because I think that book single-handedly, completely made atheism an impossibility for me. Like, I was so deeply moved by that story and by elements of that story. There's no way any kind of atheistic worldview can make sense of the experience I had in reading that story. And so when I watch people become like interested in atheism or go down these hyper skeptical pathways, I usually discover that they are not being moved deeply by story, that something has sort of disrupted that natural process of them understanding the power of story. And this, of course, I don't know how you explain that power through an atheistic lens. And so I think this is one of the reasons that I think also it's very important that we introduce our kids to stories early.
I'll blow a little sunshine your way, Jeremy. I heard you on a podcast, I think your own podcast. And I've quoted you many times since, but you were talking about the book of Song of Solomon. And you were talking about, to you, the Song of Solomon is like, it's the keystone of the Bible. And how the lover, the woman is looking for her lover and sort of seeing him faintly through a trellis, basically. And you read that and go, oh, isn't that interesting? She can't get to him. What again? And you interpret it and said, that's what life on earth is like, is that we're constantly wanting to fully see Jesus, but we never will. We won't on earth. It won't happen until we get to glory, then we'll see him face to face. It'll all come to fruition. And you did such a wonderful job of taking, I guess we could say, a story and extrapolating out of it something bigger and more meaningful. And I listened to you do that with such facility. It was so beautiful. Not all of us are able to do that for our children so easily. Can you give us some handholds or some practical advice for, you called it mediation between a story and a reality, or you might think of it as like DVD commentary. Our friend Steven here, he's an over-interrupter. He's going to pause that movie 100 times and go, now, girls, let me tell you what's going on. But is it setting it up? Is it afterwards? What's your take on that?
Yeah, let me interject before you answer. I'm gonna do my interruption.
Yes.
Which is, you just said something so important, Jeremy. I'm going to repeat it before you answer the question, which is, you said that so many Christians, they kind of shrug their shoulders at and call everything on a screen entertainment, that they miss enrichment, and that the difference between entertainment and enrichment is often the mediation of the parent. I'm not the kind of person that gets a Bible study together and talks about movies and acts like we've had a Bible time. There's no replacement for the scriptures. We're not advocating for that. But as we're talking about, there's something that can lift the words off of the page. Like you say about Obi-Wan's line for you. So I'll repeat the question, which is, how can we be better mediators for our children and people who do think in very narrow columns? How can we be more of the, can you see the meaning behind that sun, et cetera? How can we do that better?
Yeah. So we're discussing what I think of as literacy level. That's a category that we're kind of circling right now. When I'm discipling guys, oftentimes one of the things I'll introduce them to this concept of literacy and say, okay, we have a very simple idea of literacy, which is, do you have an 8th grade reading level? Great, you're literate. Bam, congratulations, you can graduate. That is a very low level of literacy. Literacy is a very expansive and kind of skill that you have to learn. Some people have a particular skill at literacy. And the way that you can tell, like if you were to read somebody, a pretty dense poem or a snippet of Shakespeare, most people are so many literacy levels below being able to even understand or appreciate Shakespeare that it just kind of like, it just sounds like, a foreign language or something, right? And that's understandable. But what we're talking about here is that's an actual problem that we need to solve. And so one of the things that I noticed is, for example, in the Jewish community, because they knew that the strength of the spiritual life of their community hinged on the literacy level of the father, they became obsessed. Even in the Middle Ages, when most people were illiterate, Jews were in small communities at a hyper level of literacy because they valued it as a community. And this is a problem that we have within the Christian community. We don't understand the danger of a low, like a father and mother with a low literacy level. Now, there was a time where we were really, really good at increasing people's literacy, right? We would spend a lot of time in school, in college, really working through difficult texts. And the way there's a very simple way you increase your literacy, and that is that you have to read fiction that is one level above your level of enjoyment. So if you're like, if I'm down here and I'm like, I really, really like Lord of the Rings, but I can't, like, the next level for you might be Charles Dickens, right? Like you might read Dickens and go, oh, now Dickens, when he wrote his books in the 1800s in England, it was considered such a low literacy level that, people just laughed at it. They thought it was like sort of trash fiction. And today Charles Dickens is oftentimes 2, 3, 4 levels above your average Christian parent. Like can they read Little Dorrit and really like, wow, or Bleak House, these incredible books that he wrote. And so you have to invest in your own literacy. And again, the point isn't to make you feel bad and say you can't do this. No, everybody can increase their literacy. It's actually very simple, but it's useful to talk to somebody who's at a little bit higher literacy level than you, and try to see if you can bump up your literacy level. Again, read something that's one level above. And you can do this with movies as well. Sometimes there are movies that just like, what you're really wrestling with is the symbols that the screenwriter is working through are just a little bit beyond your comprehension, right? There's something about it that's just a little bit too complex. And so it's important for you to say, okay, there's a lot of people who really appreciate this art form. And I feel like I'm getting like maybe 60% of it, but I'm maybe not getting 40% of it. And so you need to bump that up a little bit and try to increase that level. So what starts to happen when your literacy level gets stronger is you start to be moved by more and more sophisticated kinds of literature. And then the enrichment, the mediation we're talking about is simply sharing your heart, like what moves you with your kids. Is that simple? Like you can start with like, I love, certain Dr. Seuss books. I think they're incredibly beautiful. There's a book that he wrote called I Had Trouble in Getting to Salisalu. And it's one of his less well-known books, but it's incredibly profound. I was just reading it too. Again, that's another one that I was reading to my kids. My kids are older, and I just like, guys, there's something, don't judge yourself too harshly. If there's something that's moving you, pay attention to that. Like, and say, okay, this is a nugget, and it could be a scene from a movie. It can be, just a page of a book, or whatever. It could be a poem, wherever you're at. If you're doing these two things, you're slowly ramping up your literacy level, and you're paying attention to your body, to your emotions when you're experiencing art. And then you take that and share that with your kids, and just make that a part of sort of your family, and listen to them as well. Like what's moving you, like what strikes you, watch their body, watch their emotions get impacted by these things. That's how you start to have these deep conversations as a family.
You're sort of presupposing that we're good at this with ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
Like you have to get good at this, because I think most of us, we take entertainment where it washes over us. I don't know, I read that poem. And you're saying you have to be good at being critical in the right way. You're critiquing, what is this doing to me? What impression is this having on me? So that not only can you have that for yourself, but so that you could pass that along to a child or something.
Yeah, there's a practice that I've really noticed that happens to people when they start to make this transition from consumer to understanding enrichment. And it's when they start rewatching movies. It's when they start rereading books. It's when they start to have favorite. It's like that's the moment I can tell something's happening. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's like, I never rewatch a movie. I mean, he's like, he just chews through them, consumes them, got to the plot twist, great, next movie, whatever. Like, okay, like I said, look, that I understand where you're coming from. That hyper consumer, you're just consuming art in that manner. I need you to start to think about art more deeply than that. And so I'm not saying you have to rewatch every movie, but I'm just saying the movies or the books that have moved you the most, like you want them to be part of your internal furniture. And if you just consume it like that, like cotton candy, that'll never happen to you. And so I need you to go back and start to make lists, your top 5 list of movies, your top 5 list of books, your whatever those top 5 lists are, and start to rewatch things. And again, pay attention to yourself. Don't just consume that and get the quick dopamine hit and move on to the next Jason Bourne movie or whatever. It's like, no, like settle in and try to pay attention to what's happening and experience it over and over again. I know that experience diminishes a little bit the more often you do it. But I think that at some point you begin to value that scene, that movie, that particular turn of phrase was like a portal for you into something, into some kind of ancient, deep element of reality that it takes you into. And that's what I'm talking about. Once that starts to happen for you, then, there was this, I was reading to my kids this scene from Wind in the Willows where Molly, one of the characters, smells his house and and he is following the rat, and the rat won't slow down no matter how he pleads. And there's a way that Kenneth Grahame wrote that scene when Ratty discovers what he's done to his friend. And it is one of the most, it's so dense. It's 2 pages that unveil the sort of one of the deepest elements of friendship and one of the best definitions of home that I've ever read in my life. I'm just like, so I'm just astounded when I'm reading. I'm just like, what is this? Like, this is so deep, so powerful. But I think you have to be maybe 6 or 7 to understand it. I mean, it's not hard. And I think we actually live in a very different, like when Charles Dickens was writing, the thing that people were, the thing that was popular were like guys like Spencer, who wrote these incredibly complex epic poems that is really, frankly, beyond my literacy level. The average English person was obsessed with these epic poems. This is why C.S. Lewis, when he first was trying to become an author, he wrote, he spent 10 years writing one poem. J.R. Tolkien, this was also his obsession. He did not ever want to be a prose writer. He wanted to be a poet, but he was rejected. He wasn't good enough. And so he ended up writing The Lord of the Rings. And ironically, the poetry in The Lord of the Rings made him the most famous poet of the 20th century. So he figured out kind of the ultimate cheat code there, But I think it's really, really important to understand that because we're in the 21st century, we have access to 2,000 years, or in the English language, 500-600 years of such incredible literature. I mean, imagine you could be living before the Chronicles of Narnia. You could be living before the Lord of the Rings. You could be living before Star Wars, and trying to connect your children to these epic truths through incredibly dense poetry, like Spencer's poetry. We don't have to do that anymore. Like, we don't have to be. So all this talk about literacy, I really think it's important to try to increase that, but it's also important to understand that the writing has gone down to our level. It's not that hard to make up the difference. Like we have such great literature, such incredible movies. We have access to stories like we've never had before. And again, like this in the hands being wielded by a really thoughtful mother or father with the access to that kind of library. And now because of the internet and because of Amazon or whatever, it's so easy for us to get access to incredibly profound, life-transforming stories that we can be introducing our family to on a regular basis. And so I love being alive right now just for this reason alone. I'm just like, I can't believe I get to live after all of these epic things have been written and now disseminated in such simple forms that we can access them and share them with our kids.
I'd like to reflect something back to you. I don't know if you recognize this about yourself or not, but I hear in the way you're describing, like, say, that passage from Wind in the Willows, you don't seem to judge yourself. And what I mean by that is that you're just, I sense in myself sometimes when I'm trying to digest a piece of art, I'm going, well, what should this make me feel like? And you seem more like, I don't know, it made me feel like home. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
seems like an important gear
You have to
to
accept
have.
yourself. You have to accept that every human soul has their own aesthetic reactions to things, and that itself is an amazing part of who God made you to be. It's okay for that you to react. I love this about people. Some people, their tastes vary, like very differently, and that's great. Like, I want to know what stirs you, and it's totally fine. Like, if there are certain things that don't stir you, the only thing that I do challenge about people is this sort of left brain problem when nothing is stirring them. And that sort of happened by design. They sort of beat it out of them. The public school system or something, their job at, sitting in front of spreadsheets, something has really doused so much water on their imagination that the only thing that, moves them is like a sports event or something, which is kind of a kind of story. But I think there's something broken in so many human souls, and it doesn't take a lot to get contact with it. One of the things I find endlessly fascinating is the fact that God made us all dream in movies every night. So like it's such a weird thing that God's like, all right, I'm going to piece you together. And the average person, by the way, has 5 dreams a night. Even if you can't remember, we all have a memory problem when it comes to dreams, but we all dream over and over again. And every one of our dreams has like camera angles, right? It has tone, like a Wes Anderson. I have dreams that are like I had one last night. I was like, who came up? I've never even seen a movie with this particular, patina filter on the camera. Like, where did this come from with characters? And it's all weird and bizarre. It's all hyper symbolic. But it's like there's something inside of us that generates, an HD movie every night it would blow your mind if you somehow saw it on the screen, like how complex it was. It would take an entire team of like hundreds or thousands of people to generate that kind of a piece of symbology. And so it's like, why did God do that to us, right? Why in the world is He's like, okay, I want you to fall asleep, and then I'm going to immerse your entire brain into a completely symbolic world, and then I'm going to allow your brain to somehow generate a 3D like complex movie with characters and screen, like everything, right? Camera angles, tones, colors, everything. It's crazy, right? And so this is what I'm saying. And of course, we wake up and forget, even that we've had a dream, and we go on with our day. But that is sort of an interesting signal to me that this is how we're wired, and that we need to pay a closer attention to it. Because what's happening, this is kind of by way of saying, what's happening to you when you're watching a movie and you are reacting subconsciously, your body, your emotions are reacting to it. You're actually making contact with that part of you that dreams. Like, you're making contact with that part of you that understands and appreciates symbol. And everyone has that. Like, that nobody's born without that ability. We just poo-poo it. We just don't care about it. We don't understand its power. We don't understand its purpose. And we're getting further from it. This is one of the things that Ian McGilchrist is really raising the red flag about. Like, we're 100 years ago, people were way more connected to that part of their life, their mind, their soul, and we're getting further and further and further away from it. And it's sort of the secret reason why so many problems exist in the modern world. So much of the polarization, so much of the confusion, so much of the anger, it really is coming from this disconnection that we have, this obsession with the left hemisphere that wants to get everything right and has like one opinion about everything, and everything is hyper black and white, and thinks he can know everything, and once it discovers something, it just destroys all mystery. Like, that kind of thinking is so dangerous for somebody who wants to have a full and rich, meaningful spiritual life. It doesn't mean that there aren't truths, but it just means there's a lot of things about life and reality that we're not going to understand fully. And those are some of the most beautiful parts of life. Like, we don't want to crush those things like relationships, things like love, right? And so things like beauty. Like, I think I have kind of a suspicion that we're all supposed to come to the faith or to the gospel through the lens of beauty. Like, there's these 3 great transcendental truths, right? We know about truth, beauty, and goodness. They all are critically important. But there's something critical about beauty. And the reason why I think this is because Genesis 1 starts that way. We start with this incredibly beautiful poem, right, about how God created the world good. In other words, that word tov, are beautiful. And that we when we wake up into the world, we wake up and have an encounter with beauty, an aesthetic experience of beauty, right? We're suddenly surrounded by color and smells and sights and all of these things. And then over time, we learn the reality of moral goodness and truth, which are equally important. But I think the portal of beauty needs to be respected, and it's being deeply disrespected by so many people in the Christian community, because I think we misunderstand how God made the soul. And you see this, like I said, just in the way that God kind of constructed the Bible. So yeah, I think we need to get in contact with this part of.
What you're saying is profound. Today, I went and had a meeting with this guy. He told me about his life and marriage, which is a tragedy. And like my heart is breaking as he's telling me the story. When I got home to see my wife, what do you think I did? I threw my arms around my wife and I just told her, I'm never leaving you. Don't ever leave me. Our covenant is so precious, et cetera, et cetera. What happened was his story brought me back to life, right? I'd been in a callous assumption of like, well, today's like yesterday. And his story, like, hello, it animated me. What you're saying is that stories and movies in that frame, they have the ability to re-enchant us.
Yes.
And that's so important. I heard somebody say this past week, my dad never cries except at movies. I heard somebody say that. And I thought, that's really significant. Why would that be the one place that he would allow that? Well, I would say take him to more movies, number one. Let's get dad's heart out some more. And then let's teach dad how to have tears at things that really matter. So it's not that we go, that's stupid, throw that away. No, there's something that you're saying it's tapping into us that normal life doesn't allow, that we watch stories happen in front of us. Hopefully, maybe we could get someday to the point where reading a Bible story could do the same thing to us. We could get into the story and believe it and participate in the story in this way. But I just think that's a really important point about it has this re-enchanting power, which is really precious. And I have to throw out an example on that note. And I think it's probably, I don't know what came to mind for you, Jeff, on what might make someone more literate, but Terrence Malick immediately came to mind for me of we would be more literate if his films, you just stare at them and you're just full of wonder and you ask questions and wait a second, did I miss something? And there's like this evocative mystery that happens around you and you find yourself being re-enchanted and called to something. You don't even know what the calling is. There's just something that's deep happening here. Anyways, that all comes to mind for me.
I agree. He has a movie called To the Wonder, and it's one of his better films. But I think of Tree of Life, and Tree of Life feels inscrutable for the modern person, Jeremy, to your point, because we're all left braining it to death and going, wait, what's the plot? So this person did this and then this and this. But if you will go to your language, and I love this, I like that this theme is emerging. If you will allow the right brain to take over, you may finish the movie and go, I'm not sure what happened, but I know how it affected me. And I know what it made me feel. And I know that I remember, I love rewatching that movie. It like It's a Wonderful Life. It does a reset for me when I watch it. And I think it's because it engages that right brain.
I mean, what you were saying, Jeff, too, about like not judging yourself. I do think the thing that's judging you is the left brain wants to rip to shreds whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing. There really is a collision between these two things. And again, like one of the things that McGilchrist mentions is the left brain is actually an incredibly powerful tool, but a horrible master. Do not let that part of your life become the master. And the way that you have to be careful and guard those experiences and say that they're good. And I'm not going to let the kind of left side of my brain just rip to shreds the experience I just had. I'm going to sit in it. I'm going to see it as itself incredibly valuable, beautiful, meaningful. The fact that you have something inside of you that actually points or draws you towards meaning, like, oh, that's beautiful. And you can sense that anything's beautiful is inherently meaningful. I mean, what is more important than actually honoring and respecting that? And again, once you believe that the world is constructed that way, I don't know how you don't become a Christian. It's the only worldview that can possibly make sense of why we're constructed this way. This is why I find all these other worldviews, particularly atheism, just absurd. It's like it doesn't make any sense. Like, what are you saying? So there was some kind of pre-million species that that was trying to that discovered that by putting a couple colors together, it like attracted a mate, and therefore we evolved this. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous kind of reductive ideas that just to me, there's no possible way it could ever explain the experience that I know I'm consciously having when I'm encountering
That's
art
right.
or beauty. There's no way. It's laughable and absurd. But when you become hyper left brain, you fall susceptible to these kind of absurd reductive ideas about reality. And so we need our kids and we need ourselves to be honoring. And this is one of the reasons that gives me just full permission to think this way is because this is how the Bible is constructed. It is so much art. Almost all the prophecies are in poetry form. Most people don't know how to really enjoy Hebrew poetry because they don't even know how to enjoy English poetry because their literacy level is really dipped to a degree. Or all the stories, the symbolic stories that are full throughout Scripture, Jesus's parables, on and on and on. And this is why one of the ways I can tell if somebody's hyper left brain is that they just get stuck always in the epistles. Like they're like, oh, finally, there's like this 1/10 of the Bible that actually like feeds my left brain because Paul was incredibly logical and so he
Just
was
tell you
able.
what to do.
Yeah, they're like, that's all I want. I just please, can we just live in the epistles all the time? And so when I see a teacher or a disciple or somebody who's just like, they just somehow avoid all the rest of the Bible, I'm like, wow, that I know what you're struggling with. You are now being dominated by the left brain. And I love the epistles. I study them. They're so important, but they are a commentary on the rest of the scriptures. Paul always assumes that you're saturated in the rest of the Bible. And now he is bringing into the Gentile Greek world some understandings from the Hebraic scriptures that his systematic approach really does help. But you don't want to live in that as if that's all there is. That's not going to move you the way that, like, we're studying Isaiah right now. And Isaiah's poetry, I think the last 30 chapters of Isaiah is some of the most beautiful poetry in the history of the world. I mean, just astounding to me that it was ever written. That we have it, and even in its translated form, it's just seeping with beauty. And so, if you can't really appreciate something like that, and you're just like, no, I just tell me what to do, and let me just live in my left brain, man, that's going to really like limit your faith, your experience of God, your experience of prayer, your connection with the Holy Spirit, your ability to connect with other people. You're becoming increasingly emotionally unavailable to your friends, to your family, to your children, to your own self, to your ability to experience these good things that we're talking about in art. And so, like, we have to talk about this stuff. We have to like unveil the tragedy that's happening and the cost of it.
Can you speak to the dad who's listening to this, who's watching this, is like, well, we're talking about just kind of like whatever appeals to you, man. I like those Transformers. I like when Jason Statham drives a car off a overpass. I mean, I'm making fun of, but there
Yes.
are people who literally that appeals to them. What do you say to them?
Yeah. So you're having an experience, right? Of like, whoa, those are cool special effects or that amazing explosion. But I would say, like, look, just pay attention to some of the more subtle aesthetic and really ask yourself this question, like, what do you find like intriguing or beautiful? Like I said, I think everybody has it. And because you can have it as like a 3 or 4 year old, you can start to really experience this. I remember there was a pastor that talked about when he brought his kid to India. He had a 3-year-old son, and they were coming over this hill, and they suddenly saw the Taj Mahal, and his son goes, oh, and he said, look, a chimpanzee never would have done that, like that is a uniquely human response to beauty. And so I think what's happened, it's important just to say to that dad, you are having experiences of beauty. You are being attracted to certain characters, to certain more subtle elements of beauty beyond just the action that you're seeing on the screen. And so somebody is trying to use that kind of more cheap, shallow, cotton candy kind of elements of the movie to kind of give you enough dopamine to kind of keep you interested in that portion. But you're going to have to and part of the reason why I'm saying this is that oftentimes aesthetic reactions are just a little bit more subtle. Like, and so I think you have to understand the difference between something that's meaningful because it's like really like loud, and something that's meaningful, but subtle. And a lot of what we're talking about are sort of elements that are subtle. And I think that if you allow yourself to pay attention to those subtleties, and again, the reason I think we're not doing this is because the left brain has trained us, especially as men, there has almost been a fusion of masculinity in the left brain in some people's perception. That kind of like, just like, I don't like, a lot of times when guys get together, the primary way that they even mock each other is they will use their left brains to attack each other's right brains, right? Like, oh, you saw that, whatever. And so this is how oftentimes we joke or tear each other down. And so somebody who really embraces that endlessly, then nobody's going to have the courage in a group like that to say, hey guys, can I explain to you something I found really beautiful? Like he knows he's going to get ripped to shreds by his buddies, right? And I think that we have to be careful there, because I don't think we understand exactly what we're doing when we destroy one another's love of beauty or ability to express it.
So Jeremy, we've played around up here, pretty high level. Let's pop it down to Friday night. Give us 3 or 4 movies, bits of entertainment. What I hesitate to call it entertainment that you found got some enlightened moments through the Flickr shows that you found helpful for your family.
Yes. Well, let me start by saying I encourage you to have the courage to read small passages of fictional books that have moved you, whether they're picture books or fantasy books or anything like that. Like, and there's an incredible YouTuber. I'm a massive fan. I am like constant, like, I feel like he is my grandfather trainer. I have 3 grandkids now. And so I'm learning to be a grandfather. This guy named Malcolm Guite, Guite. And he is an absolute master of everything I'm describing here. Like I've never he's like Tolkien reincarnated as a grandfather on YouTube. I mean, it's just crazy how good this is. So I literally try to watch one of his videos every day. They're about 8 to 10 minutes long. And he brings you into his study, and he just introduces you to a poem or to a small passage in Lord of the Rings or something that moves him personally. And he's a Cambridge professor. But man, it's just incredible. So if you want to have that experience, he has actually transformed the way that I approach some of these evenings with my family. Like he's
Wow.
kind of given me permission to introduce to my kids these things. So yeah, those are that is my first recommendation. But yeah, I'm a huge fan, as I said, of movies. And part of what I think I'm kind of tempted to again, as we talk about kind of literacy levels, maybe think through. So unfortunately, a lot of the movies that I love are
Have trolls in them.
There are things, there are things that are kind of hard to like. There is some tough content that you're like having to fast forward through. But I've made a list of family teams movies. I can give you guys a few of these that I think are super helpful. That I love to watch. So there's a movie. Let me give you one movie that is really not well known. So it's a Disney movie called The Happiest Millionaire. Have you guys ever heard of that movie?
Never.
So I think
No.
he either made it just before Mary Poppins or just after. I think it was just after Mary Poppins. There's a scene where the chimney sweeps from Mary Poppins all dance around in a pub in Philadelphia. So, but get this is a true story. This is one of my heroes that they made the movie about. So his name is Anthony Biddle, and he was a very wealthy man, and just before World War I. And this is a Disney movie, like the full Mary Poppins budget, and the movie is about a father who's trying to start a disciple making movement in the city of Philadelphia. And it's really remarkable, and he's done a really good job of pulling this off. So I'm a huge fan of this movie. If I could highlight some underappreciated movies, that's definitely one. Give that one a watch. I'm a huge fan of the movie The Incredibles for families. I think that's one of the first movies. So Disney has had this history of princesses and hyper individualism, and then all of a sudden, when they partnered with Pixar, they started coming up with these, what I would consider just much more realistic movies that aren't hyper individualistic. But they start with Toy Story, but it's all it is designed around this idea of a team, right? And so you see that in Toy Story, but it really, I think, reaches its pinnacle in The Incredibles. The other thing I would say too, let me throw this out there, and this has really impacted the way I watch movies with my family, is that I began to realize. I listened to this podcast called "The Oral History of The Office." So the show The Office, and it's a really incredible podcast. The guy who plays Kevin in The Office, he's the guy who does all the interviews, and he's trying to answer one question. It goes on for like 12 to 15 hours, and he's interviewing everybody who's in that in the cast, and he's trying to answer the question: why are people so obsessed with The Office? Because there's this level of obsession that's very unusual. They don't know what it is, and so like people literally will play The Office while they're like trying to go to sleep, or just they'll have it playing in their house. They'll just watch it over and over and over again. And so in the course of this 12-hour podcast series, they suddenly discover why The Office resonated so deeply. And it was such a great moment. But they discovered the reason why The Office resonates is because it's not about The Office. It's a family, and it's a multi-generational family. And it's fast. Like once they said that, I started watching The Office again, and I'm like, okay, so Jim and Dwight are brothers. Michael is the goofy dad. You got a couple. Again, you have to see things symbolically. So most people, there are a lot of shows that do this really, really well. So we watch like Star Trek: The Next Generation with our family a lot, and it's very similar. It's basically what Star Trek: Next Generation is every episode is a moral conundrum being thrust on a multi-generational family with a patriarchal father, two or three women who symbolically represent elements of motherhood, or wife. You've got the counselor, you've got the doctor, then you've got the brothers, right? You've got the oldest brother who's Riker, you got Data, you got Geordi, you got Worf, who's kind of like the strong. So it is a family. And that's the reason why people love that show. But if you were to make a movie about or a TV show about a family that way, it's way too triggering for people, because when you actually have a father, it's like all your action. So what happens with The Office or with Star Trek or with all these shows, what they're actually doing is that they're tapping into archetypes of family, and they are getting past your sort of left brain conscious one-to-one correspondence. They kind of break it, because you can't say that Picard's a father. He's not a father. He doesn't have any children. This is, they're in a starship or whatever. And so you're constantly like obsessed with, oh my gosh, what they said and how that worked. And like, how are they going to resolve this? And you're on the edge of your seat, because what you're experiencing in that moment is a family trying to resolve a really complex issue. And the whole point of these kinds of moral tales, like that happen in The Office or Star Trek: Next Generation, is they are simulating actual real life problems that you're trying to solve yourself. And that's why your attention gets, just mesmerized, because you realize that they're coming close to cracking the code that you're trying to crack, which is what do I do when that person says that to me, or when my boss, or, and again, this is like, how do I deal with my dad? How do I deal with my mom? How do I deal with my brother when he's constantly annoying me? The Dwight and Jim. It's like, it's so interesting, because I think that family is kind of like the basic archetypal symbolic structure of our minds and our hearts. Carl Jung discovered this, by the way. It was a crazy discovery. He had, you had these situations where people, like patients of his that were deeply traumatized, were like locked in closets since they were like young children, never experienced the love of a mother or father. They would come out, and then they would send them to Carl Jung, and he would talk to them about their dreams, and they would dream about mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And that's when Carl Jung realized, oh my gosh, like we all exist within sort of these symbolic archetypes are inside of us. This is actually what made him a theist. Like he was like, I can't believe in atheism, because there's no naturalistic explanation for what I'm seeing in people that are obsessed about fatherhood and motherhood and brotherhood and sisterhood, who've never experienced anything like those things, but they know that that's what they're missing, right? And so within a fantasy story of wizards and hobbits, and it's all the same. We're all wrestling with these very, very similar sort of symbolic structures. So those are some examples of things that we've gotten into. But once I sort of understood what was actually happening in those stories, it actually became a lot more useful, as I'm like, okay, I'm not being triggered by the fact that I get what's going on in this story. Picard is acting like a father. I desperately need this help.
Great stuff from Jeremy today, Jeff. Thoughts on this deepest, that's probably the deepest that we've gone here on Rocket Pop, and certainly the longest episode we've ever had. What do you think?
I had a few headlines. Number one was, at least for me, don't judge yourself so much. Just enjoy what you enjoy and ask the questions. Gosh, God's made me a story-formed person. He's made my children story-formed people. What is this content I'm digesting? What is it speaking to deep within me? And this left brain, right brain thing, a little less left brain and a little more right brain. Understand the world is full of mystery. God has ordained it that way. We're not going to get everything figured out all the time. And if we hold too harshly to things that aren't of paramount importance, we're probably going to trip ourselves up.
So family fit, we usually talk about what part of the family is this good for? This episode is probably good for only over 18s, would you say?
Yeah, especially with some of the salty language that he was using. I wouldn't want to expose my children.
But the family fit for re-enchanting your heart would be all ages, starting with Dr. Seuss all the way up.
Yes.
So yeah, good stuff today. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
I walked away feeling inspired and feeling like,
great,
man, God made us this way. Appreciate what he's made and embrace the mystery along the way.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll see you next time. We'll be back with another fantastic review on Rocket Pop Reviews.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Thanks for listening to Rocket Pop Reviews. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. See you next time for another family-friendly review.